I've been trying to figure out. I have been trying to figure out a lot of things. I'm trying to understand stuff. You know, it's been a science thing for me. Looking at it like science. But looking at it from a philosophical point of view, too. I think that sometimes I wonder, do I really look at things scientifically or do I look at it philosophically? See, I think that there are two ways you can be scientific. I think I like the old scientists, when they didn't know that much. When they didn't know as much as people know today. Today, scientists know a lot more than scientists, let's say in the days of Galileo or the days of Copernicus. But I think that people like Copernicus and Galileo and the very early scientists were a lot smarter. I perceive them as smarter. I'm not going to say they were. But my perception is they were smarter because they were people who were looking at the raw material. They were taking the raw data and they were making something out of it. They were processing that data and coming to conclusions, which I think today people don't do. Not only scientists, but just the average person doesn't even think to do it. Most people don't contemplate things. See, we're a bunch of people who know things all the time. We know stuff because we go to school and it's handed to us. I think about it because it makes me think about something. Here I have a jar full of pennies. I have this jar full of pennies. I don't know how many pennies there are, but I'm sure it's more than 1,500. The reason why I know that is because I do have a particular jar of pennies that I've counted before. And it's 1,500, and the jar is actually a little bit smaller than this, so this is more than 1,500. But let us assume for 1 minute, all these pennies. Let's say this thing is very heavy. If I counted all those pennies, and let's just come up with a number. Let's say I count, and there's 2,223 pennies. Then I know how many pennies there are because I've actually gone through the process of counting them. I put them out on the table and I count them. And let's say I count them twice. I know how many pennies there are. I have knowledge. Knowledge based on the experience of actually counting them. I could write that down, 2,223. And then I could hand that paper to somebody else and they look at it. Oh, there's 2,223. Now I know how many pennies there are. But think about how we say things. Remember what I said about John Locke, what John Locke said. Our everyday handling of things takes away our wonder, but it does not cure us of our ignorance. I gave you accurate information. You didn't go through the physical process, but it was handed to you. In a very real sense, and keep in mind David Hume and all the things he talked about and everything in philosophy, can you truly say that you actually know that there are 2,223 pennies? Or did I just give you some information, even if it's accurate information? You were accurately informed about something, but you really don't have knowledge. You're really ignorant of how many pennies there are. Now, people might say, yeah, but that's the right amount. But it's something else. This gets more into an issue about philosophy. It's not even strictly about being right or wrong. So many times in life, we're like the person who's handed the piece of paper that somebody else had to go through all the work for. We didn't have to go through the work to figure out that the earth was round. We didn't have to go through the work to figure out that the earth is going around the sun. We didn't have to go through all the work to discover that there are things made of atoms, and atoms are made of electrons, neutrons, protons, and then just even more smaller subatomic particles. We didn't have to go through all that work. The information is accurate, I don't deny that, but it was handed to us. So we're not like people might have been in the past where they had to work for it and they had to go through trial and error. They had to make mistakes. They had to stumble sometimes. They had to get it wrong in order to get it right. We don't have to do that. It's just handed to us. We're right all the time. And I think the problem with that isn't about science. It isn't about the empirical evidence. It isn't even about lack of accuracy. But that has some effect on us psychologically because we wind up being arrogant. We become so intolerant of mistakes that we no longer become able to discover things because we're afraid of making mistakes. People who discovered things sometimes made mistakes. Sometimes they believed bizarre things that weren't true. You know, people like to look at what Isaac Newton talked about. Newton and his laws of gravity and motion. And his stuff is accurate. Much of it is very accurate. You know, I mean, when you get to the larger, bigger, comprehensive stuff, then Einstein's theory basically overrode Newton, but it took 400 years. But his basic laws of gravity, motion, and other things are true. They still hold up to this day. But people also forget that Isaac Newton was into astrology, seriously into it. He was seriously into alchemy. He was seriously into the occult. But somehow that gets swept aside. Well, let's forget about that stuff. People can believe things. They can be in error in many things that they do. You know, his stuff on physics might be very accurate, but this other stuff, this stuff that everybody else would make fun of or look at as like crazy. You know, in the world, I didn't look at it that way when I first started hearing about this stuff about Newton. Because I realized that Newton approached every one of these things with a very serious mind. It's the seriousness of his inquiries that was more important than whether or not what he believed in or was thinking about was true. He was inquiring. He was trying to figure out, are there patterns? Is there truth? I'm sure if given enough time, if he lived long enough, very much longer, he would have discovered all this stuff is bunk. You know, alchemy is nothing. He would have discovered that. He would have discovered that astrology was nothing. You know, it's just entertainment stuff more than anything else. It's not science. But the science mind is also the ordinary mind, too. I think about what Einstein said, that the difference between scientific thinking and everyday thinking is a matter of refinement. What is the scientific mind? What is the scientific thinking? Forget about the method, but the thinking. It's inquiring into things, trying to get at the truth. Sometimes you want to know if something is true. It's like when someone tells you a story. Maybe it's true, maybe it isn't. Initially, you might have a feeling about it, but you still investigate anyway. Someone may tell you a story about something that happened, and you might at first believe it. You say, wow, okay. But you still inquire. And as you go along, you begin to find inconsistencies, and you start to change your mind. See, what's important isn't so much what conclusion you reach. It's the fact that you continue to ask questions. See, I think nowadays, because everything is handed to us, we don't ask questions. We just accept it. An authority handed us the question. They gave us how many pennies there are in the jar. It's 2,223. We just accept it. And it's okay, but we don't inquire. We don't say, well, I got plenty of time now. I have this jar in front of me. They told me it was 2,223. Let me count it myself. So now I can actually know for sure whether or not this number that was given to me is true. But we don't do that because it's simply too inconvenient. It really would be inconvenient for me to go and do experiments to find out if atoms really exist, if the earth really is round, if we really are going around the sun. It would cost me billions of dollars to actually find that stuff out. And I'm pretty sure I would discover that all those things are true. So why not save the billions of dollars and just accept it? It's a sort of economical thing. It's more economical to accept something than it is to question it. But, every so often in life, you got to stop for a moment and question some things. Some things which seem obvious. That's the thing I like about what David Hume was doing with his skepticism. He questioned things that most people didn't even think to question. There are things that all of us think to question, like whether or not there's a God. But what about things that we don't stop to think to question? There's something to think about. That's, what people should do. Stop sometimes when you have time to do it and question things.